Alright guys, MTech Guy here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the one modification you want to be carrying out on your E87 1 Series if you own a manual transmission car, and that's getting the clutch delay valve out of there. Alright, so what is the clutch delay valve? Well, the clutch delay valve is a small fitting in between the clutch slave cylinder and the hose feeding it from the master cylinder. This fitting has a reduced bore in comparison to the hose and fluid pipework. The section inside the fitting with the reduced bore is called a restriction orifice. Okay, so what's its purpose and why is it there? Well, it isn't a critical piece of equipment in the clutch system, and the clutch will certainly operate perfectly fine without it. It's an addition that BMW made to slightly slow down the operation of the clutch actuation. The reason for this is that it reduces potential of driveline shock, which can be introduced by an inexperienced driver or someone who's super rough in operating the clutch. This can take a toll on the drive shaft rubber flex discs and the differential, etc. if you're not careful. Now, for an experienced driver, this delay valve can be reasonably frustrating because it can take away from the normal feel and control of a regular clutch actuation because the fluid in the system has had its flow inhibited. So, by removing the restriction orifice from the centre of the clutch delay valve, this will bring the clutch feel back to normal and it'll feel like a proper manual. So, if you enjoy driving and appreciate some normal clutch feel, it's definitely a modification worth doing. So, what considerations do we need to make before carrying out this modification? Well, the biggest thing is bleeding. The master cylinder has two chambers, one for the brakes and a much smaller section at the back for the clutch. It's separated by a divider. When it comes to bleeding, you have to be super conscious about this. When the master cylinder is full, the fluid will spill over to both chambers, but as the level reduces, which it will do when you bleed it, the brake section will stay static once it's reduced slightly, but the clutch section will continue to deplete. It's really important that you don't let this level reduce too much, which is hardly anything, or you'll end up introducing air into the system due to the position of the clutch supply hose where it exits. Now, there are a few ways you can bleed the system. The first way, you can use one of those pressure bleeders, and I bloody well hate them things. Now, if you do choose to use one of these, it's super important that you fill the reservoir first with brake fluid before pumping the master cylinder up to pressure. If you try the alternative method of not putting any fluid in the system, you'll find the level in the master cylinder clutch portion will deplete so quickly you'll start introducing air. Second way is to use a second person, the old school method, where you'll position yourself under the car with a clear tube on the slave cylinder bleed nipple. Your mate will be positioned inside the car and pump the clutch pedal 2 or 3 times before holding it down, whereby then you'll crack the bleed nipple open, let some fluid and bubbles out, then close it off before your mate lifts off the pedal. Now, only do this twice before going back to the master cylinder to top it up before repeating the same until you see no bubbles at the clear tube. And the third way, the last way, is to use a one-man brake bleed hose, which is the way I like to do it. Now, we'll have a look at the process with this shortly, but essentially the one-man bleed hose is a hose with a one-way valve at the end of it, which allows me to connect it to the slave cylinder, open the bleed nipple, and while it's open I can operate the clutch pedal and return under the car to close the bleed nipple off without sucking any air up. Now, doing it this way is still important that we give the clutch no more than 2 presses before returning to the master cylinder to top up the level, otherwise you risk the level dropping lower than the supply hose connection. There is a fourth way where you reverse bleed it from the nipple up, but we'll not get into that today. Now, there's no getting around it. Even when you clamp the slave cylinder hose off when removing the clutch delay valve, once it's all back together, you still need to bleed the system because you've had the system open to atmosphere. Don't take shortcuts, do the job properly and make sure you bleed it afterwards. Now, when it comes to the clutch delay valve, there's 2 different ways of doing this. You can either remove the clutch delay valve completely from the car and you just reconnect the hose back to the pipework, it just clips back together, but you might find that the hose is a little bit too short. Once you get under there, it's worth having a good look. Now, if you do find that you are having to stretch the hose, what you can do is take the clutch delay valve, take a 3mm punch and just knock the restriction orifice out of there and then put the clutch delay valve back in, and then that'll have a decent sized bore and you'll all be good to go. Make sense? Good. Now let's get on with the job. Alright, so let's take a look at what we're going to need to get the job done. So of course we're going to need some brake fluid to top up the reservoir with. We've got BMW .4 low viscosity fluid here. That's the stuff that's specified for this car. Now if you can't get hold of the low viscosity, any .4 will do, but ideally this is the stuff you want to be going for. And then we've got our one-man clutch bleeding kit here. That's what I'm going to be using today. Some brake clean, because we're going to be making a bit of a mess around the slave cylinder area there. Going to need an 8mm socket and a 7mm ring spanner. And you're also going to need a brake hose clamping tool, a wee pocket screwdriver flathead, and then either a couple of pairs of pliers or some channel locks, one of each, whatever, because the clutch delay valve can be quite stubborn to remove, so we're just going to need something like that to grab a hold of it and tease it out. And of course a jack and a set of axle stands to get the car up in the air, or you can use a set of ramps. Alright, so to start off with, if we take a look in the engine bay here, we need to gain access to the brake master cylinder, which lives under this plastic cover here. So to be able to remove this, we just need to push this rubber piece out the way, unclip that, and if you grab around the back there, there's just a small clip to undo, and then this cover just lifts up and out. And it is worth just giving this a little bit of a clean, just to make sure there's no dust or dirt that's going to find its way inside the reservoir there while we're messing around topping it up. Alright, so next up we're going to get the front end of the car up in the air and get it sat down securely on axle stands. Alright, so to be able to gain access to the gearbox, we next need to remove this plastic under tray here, and this is held on by a number of bolts that take an 8mm socket. Alright, so if we take a closer look now we've got our plastic panels out the way. So this little plastic piece right here, the black plastic piece, that's the clutch delay valve. There's the supply hose from the master cylinder. And there's the connector with the pipe work going to the slave cylinder, which is hiding up here. There's the bleed nipple that we're going to use to bleed it once we've removed the clutch delay valve itself. And it looks like we've got enough length on that hose to be able to remove it and then reconnect it back together. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to clamp off the hose here to minimise the amount of brake fluid that we're going to lose when we do disconnect the valve itself. And next up, we're going to take our pocket screwdriver and pop out these small metal clips that are sitting either end of the clutch delay valve, currently securing it. There's one, the second one, that's the second one. Alright, so now that the metal clips are out the way, we can now disconnect the hose from the clutch delay valve, and then once that's out the way, we can pull out the clutch delay valve from this piece here. This is where it gets messy. Got our little catch can here. And now we'll take our channel lock pliers, grab hold of this piece, and then take our regular pliers, and we should be able to tease the clutch delay valve out. It's a stubborn one. Oh, there we go. And there we have the clutch delay valve. So we'll give this a bit of a clean, and then we can press the two halves back together. It's the snap we wanted to hear, and we'll put our clip back in position to hold it all together. Here we go. Make sure it's nice and tight. I'm going to pop out. All good. Now we can remove our hose clamp. And now we've got that back together, we're ready to bleed the system. And judging by the state of this clutch fluid, it looks like it hasn't been done for quite some time. Alright, so now that the clutch delay valve is removed, we can now move on to the bleeding. So to start off with, what I've done is I've topped the reservoir right up to close to the top of the neck there. That's going to give us the best chance that this isn't going to deplete too much and start introducing air, but we will keep an eye on it when we start the bleeding. Alright, let's take a look under the car. Alright, so if we take a look underneath the car here, we can see the slave cylinder hiding right up there. It's not that easy to access, but I've removed the rubber cap off the bleed nipple and I've got my hose connected to the bleed nipple for my one-man brake bleed kit, and that's going into this bottle there that's precariously dangling off the gearbox there. So next up, I'll open the bleed nipple slightly and then I'll jump inside the car. I'll give the clutch a couple of good presses. I'll keep an eye on that fluid. I'll top it up if required. I'll probably do about 5 pumps altogether. You guys can keep an eye on things down below here, see how much air we're getting out of the system. Alright, so that should have all the air out of the system now. Tighten our bleed nipple back up. And now the bleed nipple's tightened up, we can now refit the rubber cap. There we go, so that's the bleeding complete. So I'll now get rid of this mess. What I'll do is, before we go any further, I think I'm just going to spray all this down with some brake clean, just clean things up a wee bit, and then we'll move back to the engine bay. Alright, so if we take a look at the brake fluid reservoir here, you can see that I've now topped it back off. So as I was going through the bleed procedure, as it came down slightly, I just kept topping it up every 2 or 3 pumps, just kept coming back, top it back off. I didn't let it go anywhere near this outlet pipe here. So now we've got the cap back in position, we can now refit the cover. Okay, so next up, back underneath the car, we're now ready to refit the plastic under tray. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's the clutch delay valve removed from the E87 130i, and that feels so much better now. The clutch actuation, it'll feel so much better. It's such an improvement. It's definitely a modification worth carrying out if you do own a manual transmission E87 1 Series. If you found the video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more 1 Series DIY videos. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.